everybody. I am Dr. Joydeep Banerjee here to deliver a course in Advances in Agricultural Engineering under ARPIT program. So, today the topic of our discussion is molecular intervention in plants for stress mitigation. The course outline is as such. In module 1, we discuss about definition of stress in case of plants, abiotic and biotic stresses, effect of salt stress in plants and salt stress signaling network. In module 2, we will discuss about the stress sensing in plants, effect of drought stress in plants, then gene regulation upon stress exposure in case of plants and drought stress signaling. In module 3, mostly we will discuss about the stress mitigation by plants and several transgenic approaches for stress mitigation taken by different researchers. So, let us discuss about the module 1. First of all, we would like to know that what is a stress? Stress is any unfavorable condition or things which will hamper the proper growth and development, reproduction as well as metabolism in case of plants. For most of the animals, they can escape the stress by changing their place from the stress situation to the unstressed condition, but the plants are sessile in nature. So, they cannot do that, and they have different regulatory mechanisms available within themselves which will help them to combat the unfavorable situation, the unfavorable environment. So, nowadays why the scientists are concerned about that, why a lot of studies are going on stress physiology in plants, stress biology in plants, because nowadays due to global warming and climate change, the occurrence of abiotic and biotic stresses are increasing day by day, and so we need to take care of those things, otherwise we are losing a huge amount of crop yield. Whenever a plant suffer from abiotic stress, means it does not get the proper environment to carry out its growth and development, to conduct the different metabolic pathways. So, the plant become weak under that particular circumstances, and once the plant become little bit weak, then the biotic stress become more prevalent. Biotic stress means the stress conducted by different insects, fungi, bacteria, nematodes as well as several weeds. They compete with the host plant and ultimately we face reduced yield. So, let us discuss the major abiotic stresses in case of plants. First of all, one of the important abiotic stress is salt stress. Among salt stress, different chlorides, carbonates and sulfates of sodium, potassium, calcium and magnesium are prevalent in the system. But among those different salts, the sodium and chlorides are mostly important. So, most of the scientists, when they try to mimic the salt stress in various plants, they expose the plants with sodium chloride solution, and every year around 0.2% arable land is getting converted into saline soil, either due to the human intervention or due to the improper irrigation in this way. Now, another one important abiotic stress is drought stress. Due to global warming, the drought stress situation is getting prevalent. So, if you see every year's data, a lot of part of Maharashtra, southern India, certain part of West Bengal, especially the western part, they are affected by drought stress, and under drought condition the soil water potential is reduced. So, plant try to maintain its water balance and they reduce the stomatal conductance. The stomatal opening is also reduced. So, in this way inside the plant the temperature is gradually increased and different phenotypic changes occur. Later on we will discuss those things. Then another important aspects in abiotic stress is heat stress. In certain part of the northern India like Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, Bihar, in those parts the heat wave is very prevalent during the month of summer, and at that particular heat stress condition, inside of the plant the reactive oxygen species production is enhanced. Now, what are important reactive oxygen species available in plant system? Those are either superoxide or hydroxyl radical or hydrogen peroxide, and among them the superoxide and hydroxyl radical are highly detrimental to the plant growth. They hamper different plant organs and they hamper the photosynthesis as well as the reproduction mechanism. Now, let us discuss about the cold stress. In the temperate part, mostly we can see the cold stress. It has two different parts. Either it is of chilling stress, it is known as chilling stress, where the temperature ranges from 0 degree to 15 degree Celsius. That situation is known as chilling stress. Whereas, if the temperature under cold stress goes below 0, means sub-zero condition, that is known as the freezing stress. Then another abiotic stress is metal toxicity. Nowadays, due to improper utilization of the irrigation water or due to contamination of the industrial waste into the river or some water bodies, the cadmium, lead, mercury, their contamination is increasing day by day in different soils, and it drastically hamper the plant yield and development. The photosynthesis and other metabolic pathways in the plant is hampered by those toxic metals. And arsenic, this is a very important toxicity, metal toxicity, which is which has come into the picture in about 10 to 20 around 8 to 10 decades ago. And nowadays a lot of part of West Bengal, especially in Nadia, Murshidabad district, their arsenic problem is very severe. Mostly in the rice field where a lot of irrigation is needed, there along with the irrigation water, the arsenic contamination is prevalent in the rice field, and those arsenics are accumulated in the plant, in the rice grain, and finally we are consuming it. So, it is a problem, and the scientists are trying to find out the solution for this particular problem. Then among the nutrient deficiency, the major deficiency symptoms we see for most of the macronutrients like nitrogen, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, etc. But for some micronutrients also like boron, zinc, molybdenum, we see several nutrient deficiency in different soil types. Then last but not the least, another important abiotic stress is hypoxia or anoxia. Under this situation, the soil is saturated with water, and although it is problematic to a large number of crops, especially in case of the pulse crop, this hypoxia problem is very severe, because if you think about the biological process of pulse crop, those crops can in those crops, in their roots, the rhizobium form nodules, and with the help of that nodules, rhizobium can fix the atmospheric nitrogen into the roots of those crops. So, most of the pulse crop does not need any additional nitrogenous fertilizer. So, they solely rely on rhizobium bacteria. Now, once the soil is saturated with water, the rhizobium population is hampered, and finally, we see the improper yield. And in case of anoxia condition, we can see the complete lack of oxygen supply. Even in case of rice also, we can see a problem of anoxia. Under inundated condition, we can see a severe yield reduction or complete yield loss. Now, let us discuss that the how plant types are differentiated based on the salt stress adaptability. Basically, those are classified into two types. One is the halophytes, which are adapted to highly saline environments. In close to the marine area, those type of plants are available, and those plants have the tolerance mechanisms so that they can complete their life cycle up to 200 millimolar sodium chloride stress condition. On the other hand, glycophytes, most of the crop plants belong to this category, and those are salt sensitive in nature. Now, if you think about the halophytes, which are adapted to highly saline condition, it has been subcategorized into 3 types. One is the euhalophyte, another one is recretohalophytes, and third one is pseudohalophyte. In case of euhalophytes, they basically dilute the salt within their leaves or stems to adapt salt tolerance. Those plants, as I have mentioned earlier, those are growing close to the coastal region, close to the saline soil. So, they has to withdraw the saline water from the soil, and they have succulent leaves and succulent stems, and within that leaves and stems those absorbed soil is diluted, and in this way the plant can survive and it can complete its life cycle. Its example is Sordia salsa. In case of Sundarban as well as in China, in the coastal region, a lot of Sordia species are available, and those comes into this category, the euhalophyte. Next one is recretohalophyte. Recretohalophytes, this type of plants, they basically secrete salt outside of the plant. The salt whichever they are acquiring from the soil, they excrete it mostly by some organs available on their leaves, and they have salt secretory structures, and their examples are Chenopodium quinea and Limonium bicolor. Okay. And third category among halophytes is pseudohalophytes. These are special type of plants. They have salt secreting glands on their leaves, and they try to maintain its behavior in such a way they can exclude a huge amount of salt before entering into the system. So, they have the effective filtration process, salt filtration process in their roots also. So, although they are drawing the saline water, they exclude a lot of amount of salt before entering it into their root system, and in addition to that they have the secretory glands to excrete the salts. Their example is Avicennia officinalis, and this type of plants can exclude salt rather than absorption, as it has been mentioned earlier. So, around 95% of the salt can be excluded by their roots before entering into the system. Now, coming to glycophytes, those are salt sensitive in nature. So, if you discuss about the sea water, it contains around 40 grams of dissolved salts per liter, but the glycophytic plants like rice pulses, they can tolerate only up to 1 to 3 gram per liter of salts, means it is very less, and those are considered as glycophytes. So, if salt concentration is increased, their yield and other traits are hampered, their growths are stunted. On the other hand, among glycophytes certain plants are there like barley, date palm, those plants can tolerate up to 5 gram per liter salt concentration, and those are categorized under marginal halophytic plants. Now, let us discuss the effect of salt stress on plants. So, once a plant is exposed to salt condition or salt stress condition, within a couple of minutes it senses that it is under adverse condition. So, first of all the plant senses the osmotic effect or water deficit effect. If the soil is saturated with salt, if the water which is available in the soil is saturated with salt, then the salt concentration in the soil water reduces its ability to be entered by the plant. The plant's ability is reduced to take up those waters. And once the plant's ability is reduced, finally it will hamper its growth and development, and the chlorophyll and rest of the things, the biological things are hampered. So, those things, those situation is known as the osmotic effect, a type of dehydration effect or water deficit effect. So, once the plant thinks that it cannot rescue, means the salt stress is prolonged, at that situation it has to take up those saline water into its system. So, first it try to maintain a situation so that the saline water cannot enter over into its body. So, once that situation passed away, means the situation is more detrimental for the plant, then for surviving the plant has to acquire the saline water, and once the plant starts acquiring the saline water in its system, the ion toxicity or salt toxicity starts. So, in that case we can see the salt specific effect or ion exchange effect. Okay. So, the salt which enters into the system, it basically eventually injures different plant cells, it injures different organelles, and it is gradually accumulated inside the tissue over time, and further it reduces the growth and development. Different tissue damage, even the cell rupture, those things are taken place. The salt affected soils may be divided into two parts based on the type of salt, either it is sodic or it is saline. The sodic soil is alkaline soil. Under sodic condition, basically the high exchangeable sodium percentage is available in the soil, that is ESP, exchangeable sodium percentage is more than 15, and under sodic condition the pH is also more than 8.5 or even more, whereas in case of the saline condition the electrical conductivity plays the major role. For the saline soil, the EC or electrical conductivity should be at least more than 4 decisiemens per meter, and the ESP in saline condition is less than 15. And I have mentioned earlier that in case of saline condition the sodium and chloride plays very crucial role, because their concentration is maximum in most of the salinity affected area. Now, let us discuss about the signaling pathway associated with salt stress. First of all, why do we need this? Why do we need to know the different signaling pathway, what set of genes are involved in salt stress signaling, why do we need this? Nowadays, due to different environmental calamities, I mentioned earlier that the salt stress is increasing day by day. So, we need to combat this stress, and we need to develop the plants in such a way that it can escape or it can cope up the salt stress. So, for coping up those stresses, certain genes which are important for salt tolerance should be available in those plants. So, once we know the mechanism, then we can understand that which genes are involved in salt tolerance, and if we somehow regulate those genes, then the salt tolerance of the crop plants will be increased, and we can get new varieties which will be more tolerant in nature, and it can fetch the sufficient yield even under stressed condition. So, we have mentioned that once a plant faces the salt stress, first it try to little bit maintain the situation, it try to exclude the soil inclusion in its system, but once the salt stress persists, then several regulatory networks, several genes start to work, and the plant try to maintain ion homeostasis. Means the ion level, the sodium potassium level in different parts of the plants is maintained by different genes or different signaling cascades. So, initially the root tissue encountered the salt stress, as the salt stress is coming from the soil, the water, and first plant try to exclude the sodium, and thereafter it once the exclusion mechanism does not work, several protection mechanism starts, means plant try to accumulate different types of chemicals in their system to maintain the ion homeostasis. Okay? And most of the sodium, its concentration increased in the system due to its entry through either NSCC, that is non-selective cation channels, sodium is a cation, non-selective cation channels, or several anatomical leaks. Due to those channels, most of the sodium enters into the root cell. Okay? And now we will discuss about the salt overlay sensitive signaling pathway. It is one of the important understanding regarding the salt stress signaling. A lot of genes are involved there, and if we know their function, that which genes are good, then in future I will show you that some overexpression strategies are taken by scientists to overexpress certain sets of genes to mitigate the different salt stress or different abiotic stresses. Now, this slide shows the SOS signaling pathway during salt stress. So, what is SOS? SOS stands for salt overlay sensitive pathway. So, as I mentioned earlier, that sodium is mostly entered from this part. First of all, the sodium is sensed by the different salt sensors, different sensors are available. It can discriminate between the dehydration stress. Initially, once the plant encountered the salt stress, then also it faced the dehydration like symptoms, or once the salt stress is more prevalent, it will encounter the sodium toxicity or excess salt stress. Okay. So, most of the salt enters the system through different transporters or different salt sensors. So, the transporters look like that, it is mostly available in the plasma membrane or cell wall. So, therefrom the sodium ion enters into the system. So, once the sodium enters into the system, within a couple of minutes of exposure to sodium stress, a lot of calcium gated channels are developed. Calcium is a very important signaling molecules, okay, in our system. So, once a plant encounters salt stress or any other stress, the calcium gated channels are developed in the system. So, thereafter, once the sodium is there and the calcium gated channel has been developed, then certain groups of proteins are there known as the SOS3 protein, SOS3 protein. Okay. It basically encodes a myristoylated calcium binding protein, means it is a protein which binds with calcium. So, once this type of protein, the SOS3 protein binds with calcium, its structure is changed. It is true for most of the calcium binding protein. After binding with calcium, its structure is changed, and once its structure is changed, it becomes activated and it can interact with other different proteins. So, here in case of salt overlay sensitive pathway, after this protein, another protein is involved, its name is SOS2. Okay. So, once the SOS3, SOS3, the earlier protein, once the SOS3 is activated by binding with calcium, it will activate another protein, the SOS2, and it is a serine threonine protein kinase. Okay. So, from the name itself, we can know that it is a kinase protein, and kinase is involved in phosphorylation. So, it can transfer the phosphorus group from one protein to another protein or one place to another place. So, what we can see, first the SOS3 protein is activated by calcium, then SOS3 will activate SOS2 protein, and SOS2 protein is a kinase. It can do the phosphorylation steps, and thereafter this SOS3 and SOS2 complex will work on SOS1 protein. This is a downstream protein, and the SOS1 protein is available in the apoplast region of the cell. So, in this cell you can see the salt is coming from outside, and after this type of signaling the SOS1 protein again removing the sodium out of the cell. So, this is one of the important soil exclusion mechanism available in plants and which is seen during salt stress. So, in addition to that, in addition to SOS1, other different proteins are also involved in SOS3 SOS2 signaling cascade. How do they work? The complex SOS3 SOS2, they can block the function of another enzyme HKT1. Okay. This is another transporter and it is available in the membrane, cell membrane region. So, its function is to add sodium into most of the stele or other root cells, and it basically transfer the sodium ions from the xylem. Okay. So, once the xylem is loaded with a lot of sodium ions, then HKT1 protein try to transfer those sodium into the root cell, but the SOS3 SOS2 complex will inhibit this, and this sign will highlight the inhibition process. Okay. And another protein known as NHX1, this NHX1 protein, this is available into the vacuole, and vacuole is a very important organelle in the plant cell. Okay. There most of the toxic chemicals can be stored. So, in the cytoplasm different important enzymes and organelles are available. Once the sodium concentration is more, the SOS3 SOS2 complex will activate the NHX1 and it will transfer the sodium ion inside of vacuole, so that the cytoplasm will be free from sodium ion. The sodium ion level will be reduced inside of the cytoplasm and the plant can resist the system. So, in this way the SOS pathway will work during salt stress. So, thank you for this module.